Kerri. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. We're down a few. We had a couple last minute people that couldn't make it, but we're all thrilled to pieces to be here.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, so we're glad. We were all just talking about how much we enjoyed the book, and I put the link in the chat so everybody was entering.
Oh,
Did you?
good. 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 Good.
Oh, I have it. I have it. Okay. All right. I was like, Kelly needs to enter. No. Good. Well, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm glad you have the book behind you with that great
I
cover.
do, and I have another one right here at the ready.
Good. Good. Well, why don't we just get started? I'm going to let everybody ask questions, but why don't you just start a little bit just talking about, I mean, I know you have it in your afterword and author's note, but just a little bit reminding us about how you kind of got started with this story.
Yeah. So, in the before times of 2018, I was driving to meet a friend for a movie. And I was listening to NPR, as I often do. And this amazing news story, you know how NPR does those sort of narrative news stories on the evening news, right? So, and it was about the women of Jane. And I'm not exactly sure what the if there was I don't think there was an anniversary on tap or anything like that. It was just a really interesting news story. And I just was like, oh my God. Like the more they said, the more they talked about, these were just like young women who were, feminists and part of the women's liberation movement. And they slowly started as a abortion referral service. And then they ultimately learned to perform the procedure themselves. And I was like, what? Like with every new piece of information, I was like, you can't be serious. And by the time I parked, I was like, I could not, I like looked them up. I was like, are there any novels or books? And, there was one nonfiction book that I could find, quickly. There were no novels. And I just thought, oh my God, I've got to write about them. So, yeah, so that's how I got the idea. I always think it's interesting how writers in general get their ideas. I mean, I've gotten them from so many different places, and the news is a great place for stories sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's fascinating that these women were around for so long and that not many people know about them. I mean, they were
Yeah.
around for so long, but you know what I mean? They were around in the 70s. The story's not a new one, and it's just now coming out, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, like so there were when I started talking about wanting to write this book kind of in 2018, 2019. I mean, 2018 by the way was like when the Kennedy debutante came out. So like this was like really
Wow.
early in my, historical writing career. Um, you know, and but when I would talk to people, hardly anyone had heard of them. And the people who had were like, "Oh yeah, aren't they interesting?" Or like some people had heard like the same NPR piece, or they had learned about them another way. But it was pretty rare. But then, with as the world changed in the last few years, and especially in the last year, I find more and more people have heard of them because they've been in the news more and more because of Dobbs. And also, a couple of movies have been made about them. Two, to the best of my knowledge, two narrative like feature films. One was a very small independent film, and the other one came out last year with Elizabeth Banks and Sigourney Weaver. So that brought a lot of have any of you seen that? I still haven't seen it.
Is that the
um
one, Jessica, that you put in the chat?
I'm not sure. Is that the one that came out on HBO that you're referring to?
there I
There's
don't
one
know.
in the
There's a
chat that
documentary
she put out. Let's see. There's a movie on HBO called The Janes that came out in 2022.
that I think is a documentary.
Oh, okay.
And I have not watched that yet either. I didn't want to see the two feature films because I didn't want my own imagination to kind of be influenced by another artist's imagination. I think that's a pretty common fear among novelists. So, but I really want to see it now. I want to see both of them now. I did watch a few documentaries. There was a very early, like sort of short documentary about them that was done in the 90s that I did watch as part of my research. It was hard to find. Like I had to request it through my local public library system in Boston. And then there was a great documentary that I really recommend. It's been made sometime in the last 5-ish years. It's called She's Beautiful When She's Angry. And that was probably a documentary that you might have been able to see in like a local art house place, but it quickly went to streaming, and it's very good. And it talks a lot about the Jane Collective, but it's also it's sort of, it has a bigger lens. It's about kind of this moment in I call it the women's liberation movement, right, in the early 70s.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, the other thing I was kind of curious about is this is obviously a topic that has a lot of opinions, very strong opinions. So what was it like trying to get it published? I mean, was the process okay for you?
Well, I, I think what's really important is where I've landed, which is that my publisher is completely behind it. But when I first pitched it to them, my agent and my editor have been 100% on board from the word go. But I first pitched it to them kind of alongside the Paris bookseller in 2019. And this was just like Kennedy had been out for a while and Grace Kelly was about to come out. And I think they looked at these two ideas and they were like, yes, Paris bookseller, like you can definitely do that next. We're not so sure about this other one. let's talk about it again later. And then it was in the fall of 2020 that I was finishing the Paris bookseller. I was increasingly passionate about this, writing a novel about the Jane Collective. It didn't have this title yet. I just kept calling it the Jane novel. It was just the Jane novel. And, I had done some research, I'd done some homework, and I had this Zoom call, because really it was only Zoom in the fall of 2020, with my agent, my editor, and her boss in the imprint. And my agent and I were kind of able to position it in a way that made sense for them. I think that they were worried about publishing an abortion book, which I get. My comparison has always been Big Little Lies. Big Little Lies is about domestic violence, but no one says that. That's not the way anybody describes the book, but that is what it's about. So I tried to position this book as it's about abortion, but it's really about women's friendship and feminist protest and all this stuff. And so that was what got the green light. But then so as I'm revising it, Dobbs happens, and the publisher's like, oh my God, it brings out the righteous feminist in everybody. They're like, bring it, so it's terrible what has happened. But it's also, from my perspective with this book, it's been interesting to see how people's appetite for literary activism has changed in a good way.
Yes, exactly. I was just curious because I know it is a fraught topic, and I was just kind of curious how all of that had come about.
Yeah, so that is the condensed version. So I'm really, Berkeley's been really great. They're really behind the book, and they're excited about it, and I can't ask for more than that.
Absolutely. Good. Well, I don't want to ask all the questions. So who wants to ask questions?
Yeah. However you want to do it.
And I was like, usually it's a chatty group. Does anybody else have questions?
Well, yeah.
Carmen?
I really enjoyed the book, and I was curious which character you had the most difficulty relating to and putting together.
That's a good question. I thought you were going to ask a different question, which I'm actually better equipped to answer. So I actually found all three of them pretty easy to relate to, but Veronica was the most challenging character to write and really went through many iterations over many drafts. She was angrier in earlier drafts, and a lot of early readers really were like, I'm having a hard time relating to her. I'm like, I get her so much.
I'm so angry.
And yeah, but and I think that if I had kind of had all the time in the world to like really work on that anger piece and like make her I don't know. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. I had a deadline to meet, and I saw a way of tweaking her character to make her the character that you read. Um, so so she was the hardest one to write, and that was a surprise to me, because to me in the earlier drafts she was the strongest character, but actually all my beta readers and my editor, they all really love Patty. Patty was the character who people were like, she's surprising. She does a lot of things that are surprising to readers. And she I think also her growth is kind of the most obvious arc. And in that way, it's very satisfying for readers. And it was satisfying to write also. And Margaret also evolved and had different names for different reasons before she became Margaret. She was always a young professor, but in earlier drafts, she was not as big of a volunteer in Jane. And one of the comments that I kind of got from my friends, and some of my beta readers are writers, like Elise Hooper, who wrote The Other Alcott, and she's an amazing reader, and she gives terrific comments on early drafts. She's always one of my best readers. And Renee Rosen, lots. So like these are the people who are giving me these early comments. So Margaret, like Elise was the one who put it well. She was like, everyone wanted sort of more Jane in the novel. And Elise was like, listen, Margaret's taking up a lot of real estate in the book. So like, how can you give the Margaret sections more Jane? And that was like the aha moment for me. I was like, oh, okay. I don't even remember. She was not volunteering her apartment in those earlier drafts. She was just barely involved. So once I figured out that she was secretly volunteering in a more integrated way, that was kind of the key for her and her storyline for me.
Why did she change names?
She changed names. She only changed names once. Phyllis has had like 4 names. Why did she change names? Margaret's original name was Dina. And midway through my writing and research, I read a book about the Jane Collective written by one of the members. Her name is Judith Arcana. And her kind of like alter ego in her book, which is kind of a hybrid fiction, nonfiction book. It's a very interesting book. I don't know how she pronounces it, but I'm going to pronounce it Dina. She had spelled it totally differently. I had spelled it Deena, and I think she wrote it as Denaah. But I was like, that's just too close for comfort. Like I didn't want one of my characters to have, because my characters are not in any way based on the real women, I didn't want to have that name similarity. So I was like, okay, she can't be Dina anymore. But she was Dina for many drafts.
That's interesting that you picked a name that was so similar.
It was a real fluke, because I named her Dina before I ever picked up Judith's book.
That's fascinating. I'm going to let Claire know. Claire, I just dropped in the link to join the chance for Kerri's giveaway. It looks like people can't access it if they weren't in there ahead of time. I just want to make sure you saw it. Yeah. Everybody else, I think, joined, but I popped it in more time because it doesn't seem to be letting people see it if they weren't on. So Claire, you can hop in the chat and join if you want.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted her to know.
Yeah, no.
Seems to be causing us a little drama.
Yeah, other questions?
Well, maybe just to build on that, you mentioned Phyllis also having a lot of names. I'm just curious, as you're getting to know your characters, does this happen in other books where you just feel like...
So, that's a good question, but no, because my previous books were about real people. So they had names. I always, even in my biographical novels, which are populated by real people, large and small characters, I always make up at least one character who I can just have them say and do whatever I want them to say and do. But for the most part, Ernest Hemingway's name is Ernest Hemingway. And I wanted to keep that. So this is actually like a funny, fun fact about me is I'm really bad with names anyway. Like I teach and I have a hard time remembering my students' names. I don't forget a face. I'm really good with faces, and I'll know where I know you from, but I won't remember your name. I'm going to my 30th high school reunion in a month, and I'm like, I hope there are name tags.
You're bringing your yearbook with you. Point yourself out here.
I'm not sure that would work.
Yeah, no, at that point, that's true.
Right? Like, I think especially I'm noticing like men look
And yes,
really different.
especially
Yeah,
with
right?
their hair and stuff. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes the name tags have your high school picture and then your current name. And that's extremely nice.
Yeah, to connect it up. Yes, because I can remember that at college reunion, somebody would say a name and I'd be like, I don't, this doesn't look anything like I thought that person looked. So yeah, it's true.
You guys can't see, but I'm wearing my 1973,
Oh,
which is the same as the sticker in the giveaway. I was hoping that.
I love that. Such a nice giveaway. I love that idea.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fun.
So I'll be doing them at some of my live events and stuff too. So I'm excited about that.
People will love that. Yeah, that's very fun.
Yeah.
Where are you doing your live events? If one wanted to come see you in person?
Well, yeah. So are you guys are all based near Cindy and
No,
Texas?
well, some people are, but some people are all over.
Okay, so my launch event is in Wellesley, Massachusetts at Wellesley Books. And then I'm doing an event in Chicago, which is going to be super fun. Are you in Chicago?
Yeah.
At the bookseller?
Oh, I live like a mile and a half from the bookseller.
Okay, with Renee Rosen, and it's on Tuesday, September 26th.
Oh, boogers. I'm flying back into town that night. I don't get in until like 8:30 at night.
What a bummer, but they will have signed stock.
Okay, well, I will pick up a signed copy for
Yeah,
my.
I mean, I assume that they will. I mean, bookstores usually have me sign the stock. And then I'm doing two events in California, one at Warwick's in La Jolla, which is such a great store. And I'm doing that one with Stephen Rowley of the Celebrants. I can't wait to do that. I did an event with him here in Massachusetts when he came back in June. Seems like a million years ago. And then I'm doing another one in Northern California in a town called Pleasanton. I'm from California. Otherwise, I wouldn't be going to California, but I can sort of bring some peeps in California. And then I'm doing one last event in October in Massachusetts at An Unlikely Story, which is it's a bookstore that's owned by Jeff Kinney. Yeah, it's a great bookstore. He's the Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Right,
Yeah.
And it's really kind of a magical bookstore. It's like an hour away from me, so it is not convenient, but I would go there for any event, anytime. It's really it's a fantastic store and they do a great job.
It may be the most beautiful bookstore I've ever been to.
Right? I mean, have you been to his studio on the second floor?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to the Miami Book Fair. So that'll be super fun.
Oh, that will be fun. I've always wanted to go to that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I haven't done very many book fairs really, so it'll be really interesting.
I have a question for you, Kerri. We were talking about in our chat just some of the things that were surprising to us that we learned from the book. And I'm curious from your perspective, what were some of the most surprising things as you were researching?
What was most surprising to me was how different their attitude toward abortion really was than our attitude today. And I've tried to insert this into I think there was a little bit of this in the author's note, but I'm 48 years old. I was born in 1975. And so I grew up with the pro-life movement, which we now tend to call the anti-abortion movement, right? Who really, I kind of put together in researching this book has kind of like hijacked the language around abortion so that we talk about it in terms of life and all this other stuff, whereas they just did not talk about it that way in the 70s. They just did not. That wasn't Judith Arcana in her book about Jane said, she put it really well. She's like, when someone was pregnant and wanted to be pregnant, we called it a baby. When they didn't, we didn't, and it was a much more dispassionate conversation. It was really about healthcare and women's autonomy and women's liberation and all of that. And I think that we've lost a lot of that kind of empowering language around this issue. Which isn't to say that it's not a complicated and difficult decision to make. It is. But I think language is powerful. And the way we talk about something, like, this doesn't have to be the worst day of a woman's life. And they did not think that it was. And that wasn't the way they treated it. And so a woman's whole experience with Jane was a positive one. So that was the most surprising thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Kerri.
I'm also happy to answer like craft questions, or it doesn't have to always, sometimes it doesn't have to be about the book.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you first started in 2018, like, did you feel differently about the topic than you do now after the research, or did that shift at all? Just because it has been, lots has happened since 2018, I guess.
I'm not sure. I feel like inside myself differently about the topic. I think that what I'm probably more aware of and impressed by is what providers really have to go through to do what they do. And, since Dobbs and, reading these like just horrible news stories about providers not knowing if they can even discuss options with women in certain states, if they're going to be arrested for that, like, is this a speech issue? Like, what is right? What is legal? What is, what can we do? And so writing about these women who, in order to help other women when the law was unjust, violate the law, was really, it's still a wow. I mean, like, I've written this book and it still is impressive to me that they did it, and that they did it so well for so long. And I know that, even if I could name names, I wouldn't, but knowing that there are people just like these women now who are providing similar services, illegally, just breaks my heart that we are like back there. So
I was amazed that those women were providing those services and they weren't doctors. Like, that just seemed so, I don't know, extra alarming to me. Like, the whole process would be stressful and you're trying to decide what to do. It is illegal. It's all covert. And then on top of it, you have that layer.
Right. So I did, for comfort, for modern reader comfort, including my own, Melanie, the character who's a nurse, I have a nurse on the Jane staff. But in real life, there was not a nurse on the staff. They really, the way it happened was, so two of the original founders of the referral service, slowly over time, and everything is wildly condensed in my novel because it's a novel and it has to have a narrative, it has to have a drive and excitement and stuff. But really, from like the mid 60s to the late 60s, maybe around 1970, these women who were referring other women to providers slowly became more involved in the process, and like entering the room and holding people's hands and all that stuff. And once they were in the room, they could kind of see what was happening. And actually what really happened was they learned that their favorite provider, like the most reliable, the one who did the cleanest, best, safest abortions, was not a doctor. And that was the light bulb moment for them. They were like, well, if he can do it, then
we can do it. Right.
Right. Like we already basically understand how it works.
Right.
So that was I guess that also sort of answers an earlier question. Like that was kind of like, wow, right? Like making that leap, but because, the organization really was rooted in feminist thinking, that of course they wanted to make it an all women's health organization. Like, of course they did. There was some serendipity there too. Like the male provider, was sort of wanting to leave Chicago anyway. So he kind of trained them on his way out.
And I guess they just didn't worry about liability and issues related to that.
They did have friendlies all over Chicago. That really is true. But they couldn't keep records because what they were doing was illegal. Or they have very minor records, but like the estimates are that they referred or provided like something like 11,000 abortions. And yeah, I mean, like with like a remarkably low incident of complications because they gave them a baggie of tetracycline to take home. Like they were clean. And I mean, we use this word clean. It was clean, right? Because people, it was safe and everyone was fine. No one got sick. And yet they were using like boxes and boxes and boxes of Kleenex, if you can imagine that, and Kotex, and so it's not like they were in like a sterile hospital environment.
Everything sterilized, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, they were, yeah, right. The instruments that they were using were sterilized, but the room itself couldn't.
Right. That's what right.
But what they did worked. They figured out what was going to work, and they made it work.
Can you talk about your title? You sounded like, this wasn't your original title, and maybe a little bit about the cover too. Like, how did those come?
Oh yeah. So this is fun. Okay, so I'm not a very good titler, just like I'm not a very good namer of characters. The only title I came up with right off the bat was The Paris Bookseller. And at one point, I suggested to my editor, I was like, there are all these like the Paris something or other books. Should we change our title? She's like, no. It's the perfect title for that book. It has the two magic words in it, Paris and book. Like, we're not changing that title. So, okay. So with that as my preamble, and I didn't name either The Kennedy Debutante or The Girl in White Gloves. I did not come up with those titles. And no surprise, right? Titles are a marketing decision, right? It's not so when my editor kind of went to the team at the publishing house, there was a lot of conversation about like what would make a good title. And so she came back to me and was like, we want like a lyrical title, like something that kind of like represents the essence of the book. And I was like, okay, all right. And then, you go back to your beta readers, and you start a group text, and you're like, okay, title brainstorming time. But what I did, so there were a whole lot of ideas that got lobbed around, but with this word lyrical, I was like, well, okay, I'm going to look up some songs. And so very quickly I honed down two songs. This is not the name of the song, but this is the Carole King song, You've Got a Friend, right? And then the other contender was Freedom's Just Another Word, from the Janis Joplin, it's actually called Me and Bobby McGee. And she didn't write it, but she's the most famous singer of it. But anyway, so my editor, everyone liked those two titles. My editor took them back to the team, and they were like, all you have to do is call. And initially that one actually was my second favorite, but it's because I'm really thrilled with this title. It has, as you guys have read the book, there's so much. The word call means so many things in the book. And the idea of all you have to do is call, it just has all the meanings. Like it's just many, many, many layers of meaning. And none of us are, Cindy, is this your daughter sitting with you?
Oh no, it's Kelly Hooker, who's Kelly Hooker's books.
Oh, okay.
I'm visiting Cindy from Michigan. I'm in Houston.
Okay.
But she is a lot younger than I am.
You look quite young. And so you're probably the youngest woman sitting in this room. So, but do you remember landlines and twisting like phone cords around your finger? You are old enough for that?
Yeah, okay. I'm 35, so.
Oh, Well, all right. Okay.
Oh,
Just like,
It looks so young.
I got it. I got the landline.
Zoom ages you down.
Yeah. I'll take it.
Yeah. So anyway, I had a lot of fun as someone who, was born in 1975 and raised on those phones, I had a lot of fun with the phone imagery. And that brings me to the cover.
Yes, the cover is so good.
It's not easy to arrive at. And so you guys have seen, the Paris bookseller cover, which is based on this painting, right? So like the Paris bookseller cover was sort of a hard act to follow. It was such a great cover. Like I have this painting, I've sat in front of it for like many interviews. And so, but that's not the way most book covers are made. Most book covers are made from like, some compilation of stock images or like color, whatever. There was a much earlier iteration of this cover, which used the images of the three women, but it had very different font and a very different color scheme. And I actually really liked it. But the sales folks who I really trust said they didn't like that cover. And they wanted the cover to be more 70s and more like representative of reproductive justice. So that sent us all on a whole cover tangent situation that it was not great. And
he's like, what a nightmare.
But everyone, I have to say, this is one of the reasons I love Berkeley so much. They really hung in there with me. And I like to think that I'm relatively flexible. Like I try to say yes to as much as I can so that when I say like really no to something, it like they're not going to be like, oh, she says no to everything. So I said really no to a few covers ideas, and I kept coaxing them back to the original cover. I kept sort of describing why the original cover was a good cover. And I'm sorry, I don't have anything, a version of it to show you. But so what they finally did was they took this, which I have to imagine this is just a stock image, right, of the three women with their boots and their dresses, right? And they started playing with the covers, the colors, and the fonts of the title, and we landed on this. And I was so happy. And I mean, like, do you guys have hardbacks or do you have ARCs?
No, we just had the NetGalley.
Oh, okay. So when you see it in person, it has this beautiful dark green. It's like almost black, but it's like super dark green, like almost like a brocade. It's just beautiful. I mean, I could not be happier with the cover. It's also fun because there's the whole green through line with the Paris bookseller to this one. Yeah. And apparently green is the color of reproductive justice. So and at some point the art department like homed in on that and was like, okay, we want to have some green for people who know that. Right. We want to have like a green heavy, yeah.
What were the ones that you didn't like? What did they look like?
Well, there was, a classic, like it's become such a meme in historical fiction. There were like three women facing away.
Yeah.
Like looking at Chicago. And it wasn't like it was a bad cover, but I was just like, no, it just wasn't unique enough, Yeah. And, the other thing that I really, and this is snaps to my much younger assistant, Liz, who really helped me wrap my head around this. There was also like a move to use, I'm actually wearing a necklace with the sort of the women's symbol on it, to use the women's symbol on the cover and or in like in some of the design of the internal pages. And I ultimately said no to that too, even though I think it's cool and very period. I think now, because of the way we think about reproductive justice, it is not only women. And so I really want people to be able to pick this book up, people of everywhere on the gender spectrum, to be able to pick this book up and say, okay, it's set in 1970, so it's about women, but I don't feel alienated by anything in it. Does that make sense? So that is the very long explanation of how we got to this cover.
I mean, I always love cover conversations. So,
me too.
The more, the merrier on that. So I think it's interesting to hear it all and how it comes about.
Yeah.
And I'm always so tired of the looking away. I mean, I think that just needs to be retired. So I think that's good.
You know what the problem is? It still sells books.
Yeah, I know. That's what
That
people say.
like until it stops selling books, they're going to keep using it. But almost all writers I know have requested not to have it. So I think that's going to be the ultimate push.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely could not. I actually tried really hard to request like one of those more abstract type covers that doesn't have anything figurative on it. And they're like, that was like a hard no. They were like, you are going to have women on this cover. I'm like, okay. But I do think that because the font is so graphic and the way that they've stylized the women, it like from a distance, it almost has that a little bit of that graphic feel. So I'm totally cool with it.
And the nice thing is where they've cut them versus like where it's like here or here, where you know, sometimes I'm like, why did they choose it right here? You know, so yeah, I think that it's a nice lopping off point.
It's always been cropped that way.
I like that.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Well, what about writing about you mentioned this, your last 3 books have been about actual people. So what was the most difficult thing or the most different thing about writing a book where you weren't writing about actual people?
Everything. It was like dangling from a windowsill with like in a building with no scaffolding attached, you know. Like, so I mean, I have written novels that are not about real people. 5 of them, which never got published. So when I went into this one, knowing that I was making everything up, there was a little bit of like, maybe I should, like I'm not good at this. So there was definitely some fear and anxiety that I needed to kind of get over just by doing it. Right. And at one point, my editor actually made a really great suggestion to me, which was, she was like, you know, Kerri, like with the 3 biographical novels, you read biographies of these women to get to know them. She's like, why don't you write little mini biographies of them to get to know them? And I was like, okay. So that really helped. And I now actually make that as an assignment for my students. It helped me so much. It really it helped me get inside, like write their kind of backstory so that I knew things about them that I could sprinkle into the book or not, but it really helped me understand what made them tick. So, you know, and also, you know, there's 3 narrators here instead of just 1, which also made it more challenging to write. But I liked that. Somehow moving between the 3 wasn't as difficult as getting to know the 3 of them. Like knowing, I had this kind of gut sense for when to cut from one character to another. There were times when I kept wanting to go back and forth between 2 characters, and like one would get a little bit left out and I would have to figure out how to like reinsert her in, but it all worked out.
What do you think you'll do next? Or do you know what you're doing next?
I have signed for 2 more books with Berkeley, and the next one, I'm very excited. So it's going to be a pretty long gap, much longer than any of my other ones. My guess is we're looking at 2026 for the next week, and it's going to be called, its current working title is Summer of Love. And it's a dual timeline novel set in this 1960s and the 2010s. And so there's going to be different narrators as well as different timelines. And we'll see. I'm saying this to you, and just please know that when the book comes out, it might be totally different from what I'm about to describe. But I'm curious about this whole roving 3rd person narrator. Have you guys read Lessons in Chemistry? Okay, loved Lessons in Chemistry. So Elizabeth Zott we might call her the anchor character. We're in her head the most, but we also get into other points of view, including the dog, which is the best, right? So I call that roving 3rd. It's not omniscient. We don't know everything at any one given time, but we move around. And Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow did it too. So I'm seeing more and more of it. I'm very curious about it. So I'm going to try it and see how it feels. In some ways, I feel like all you have to do is kind kind of prepped me for doing it, because I was going back and forth between the three characters. So we'll see.
Well, that's exciting. And that's nice that you have a little bit more time.
Yeah. It took me a while to figure out what the next book was going to be, which was also a change, but I got there. I did the artist's way.
Well, does anybody else have any questions before we wrap up?
I don't have a question, but I just have to say this book was absolute perfection. Like there's no critique of it. I absolutely loved it so much. I was very excited for tonight. The book was just, I can't even give the words justice. It was just so amazing. I loved it so much.
Oh, thank you. That really means a lot to me. I worked hard on this book.
I just think, and everything Cynthia said, but I have a daughter who's 36, and they need to know, I mean, what's in this book is not strictly abortion. It's other things that women were coping with. And that cannot be forgotten, because we are still in the fight. If anything, we're in it more. And I just, it's one of the best books I've read in a very, very long time. So important for girls. I mean, everybody, but particularly my daughter. So
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I went to a women's march at some point in the writing of this, before Dobbs. And there were all these, abortion was still legal and safe and everything. Although, everyone was a little worried. And so everyone's carrying their signs. And my favorite sign was on a green particle board written in black Sharpie, "I can't believe we're still fighting for this shit."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. It's hard to believe.
It's hard to. Thank you, though. I really appreciate you guys reading this early, and coming and chatting with me. And if I can see you in person, that's great. And let's do the raffle. Can I?
Yeah. Is everybody signed up? Do you want to sign up?
No, it's
okay.
I have a hard copy at home, and Kerri's right. It's beautiful. Like it's
good. That's
yeah,
right.
it's really a beautiful cover.
Okay, so there are some lines skipped here on the so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people on the.
That should be right, because I did not share it with, I just let people that were going to be on tonight.
Okay. Random number generator. Okay. 1 through 6. Okay, here we go. I don't know if you can see it. We're going to generate it. Number 5, which is Janelle.
Yay!
Awesome. Thank you.
So I will email and I get your snail mail address and put it in the mail.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So anyway, it was great to meet all of you. And thank you so much, Cindy, for putting this together. This is really, really great.
I have loved Kerri's book since book 1, The Kennedy Debutante, which actually is probably still my very favorite. I just love that book. So I'm glad we were able to do this.
Yeah, you were, it's really, your support has really meant so much to me. I remember you were one of the first Bookstagrammer book influencers to kind of put your name and support the book. And I was like, who is she? And so it was just such an honor. And then I figured out who you were and I was like, oh my God, she likes my book.
We connected up with each other. And then I think you connected me with Elise. I was just thinking about that a minute ago. What? I think maybe, because I'm trying to remember how I connected up with Elise. And I feel like maybe I don't remember, but I forgot because I knew y'all were good friends. So yeah, so I'm happy.
We're still whole world of historical fiction writers. We're really we look supportive on the internet and we actually are.
Well, the cool thing is, you and their agent, Kevin Lyon, who I interviewed for the podcast for the behind the scenes, they all call themselves the Lionesses. And it's all her different people that work together. Renee Rosen's one of them, which you talked about, and a variety of them. It's a good group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we read Renee's book early and did this with her. So we're excited for her Barbie book, which is coming next.
Yeah. Yes. She's posting amazing pictures from the Barbie bunker right now on Instagram. They're so great. Anyway, all right. Well, have a lovely evening, everybody. It's a little later for me, but not too much later.
Right.
Thank you
Take
so
care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.